This just in, Santa Claus is dead.
You're listening to Binnall of America Audio.
Merry Christmas!
Now, during this time, this is kind of like a sociological, in a way, question, but you were in the mix here, so you know. Well, what was the mood like in ufology at the time of this 68 Congressional Committee?
There was a lot of excitement. NICAP was going full tilt. There were, had been lots of good sightings. McDonald's addition to the fold, giving talks all over the place to professional groups, certainly helped. I mean, how can you turn down a college professor,
Yeah.
So the mood was good, but there was one thing that was in the background. That was the fact that the Condon study was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you may have noticed I listed the Condon report as one of my 5 sources, good sources of data. Most people don't realize, they don't get past the Condon summary and conclusions, the first chapter, that 30% of the 117 cases they studied in detail could not be identified.
Yeah.
30%. But the public word through the media, when the Condon report came out in early 69, was nothing further to be learned about UFOs. Scientific study shows no evidence for UFOs. Now the UFO nuts can join that other crazy group, the Flat Earth Society. That was in a California paper.
Oh, man. And
so this was in the transition period. Things were looking great, and then Condon put the kibosh on things. And, to illustrate, and I won't go into all the things wrong with the Condon report. There are several good papers about that. But they have a whole chapter on government involvement in UFO investigations. Nowhere do they mention the largest study ever done for the government, Project Blue Book Special Report 14, even though it covered 3,201 sightings, and they only covered 117. And even though I know Condon knew about it because I wrote him about it and got an answer acknowledging my letter. So, I would say that indicates maybe bias.
I think so.
Just a little bit here and there.
When the Condon report came out, like you said, it was sort of like a death knell, really, for mainstream acceptance of ufology at the time, or a severe blow.
Yes,
a lot of people look back on that as the turning point in ufology and really took a hit. Did the field feel it at the time? Was everyone like, this is disastrous?
Well, there's no question that both APRO and NICAP membership lists fell rather quickly. The local sections were having trouble. I must say this, in Pittsburgh, because our group had been so active with the media before the Condon report came out, and because, believe it or not, I got my first copy from the producers of that radio program, Contact. They called me and said, Stan, we've been informed we're going to be getting an early copy of the study. Would you come on the program and talk about it? Sure, they allowed like 3 days. I didn't realize it was a 965-page book. But I did that. The press treated us fair in Pittsburgh. They because I had the early copy, I was able to make cogent statements about what was wrong with it and what was right about it. But around the rest of the country, no, it was awful tough on the groups, and things fell off very rapidly until the big wave in '73. Remember the Hickson Parker case down in Mississippi? Mm-hmm. That stirred things up. But, I have to say this. I spoke at, a typical example might be East Carolina State University in 1968. In Greenville, North Carolina, population about 10,000. Mm-hmm. I spoke there. They had 2,000 people for my lecture.
Wow.
And, a packed house. And probably because there wasn't much to do in Greenville. And, young people today may forget that there was a time when you got maybe 3 television stations, if you were lucky, 4. There was no Blockbusters down the street. There was no internet. Mm-hmm. There were no cable channels. And so an outsider, an expert coming into town, heck, in that case, the Junior Chamber of Commerce sold tickets for the series. Mine was the best attended, and no, I didn't get a cut of the take at the door. But what I'm saying is that I've always had a clear indication that there was great interest, as long as the sponsor stresses my professional background, nuclear physicist, degrees from University of Chicago, worked for GE, GM, Westinghouse, household names. People will turn up. If the sponsor is a university, simply because, well, if he was a nut, they wouldn't have him.
Yeah.
I'm being an optimist here, but that's the general attitude. You can't, if you're sponsored by the local nut society, people don't want to show up. They're afraid of being seen in public, Yeah. So I've always had great crowds, much to the surprise usually of the campus people, and especially drawing people from off campus. That used to surprise the campuses. Well, they thought maybe their students would be interested. They didn't realize the town would be interested. And so things have gone through ups and downs. Mm-hmm. But look, I spoke at Pikes Peak Community College this past March in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And that's the home of the Air Force, Air Defense Command, or whatever the latest name of the organization is. And there's a big Air Force presence there, Peterson Air Force Base, and so forth. Anyway, they did a lot of promotion. I got in a day early, did radio and television and stuff. We had to schedule a second lecture at the college.
Wow.
That same evening. They'd never had to do that before. It's not just me. It's the interest in the subject.
Yeah.
And people have seen me on television. That doesn't hurt. They may not remember my name, but they see my picture. And, oh, yeah, I saw him on such and such, But that was just this past March. So, the interest is there. But there's a real laughter curtain to be gotten through here.
Yeah.
It's illustrated by the fact that I once asked a college class of about 100 students. I often appear in classes on campus. I said, look, I want to find out your views about certain things, but I want them to be your views and not those of your classmates. I want you to vote with your eyes closed. And your instructor and I will count the votes. And to make a long story short, 80% of them thought most people didn't think there were UFOs, and 80% of that group did think there were UFOs. That's a big dichotomy there. However, people act on the basis of their perception of how other people will respond. Mm-hmm. The laughter curtain is real. When I ask at the end of my lectures, I find out the same thing. I get the first question. How many people here believe that they have seen what I would consider to be a flying saucer? And I've defined my terms early on.
Yeah.
And the hands go up reluctantly. You can see them. They know I'm not going to laugh, but because I've already lambasted the noisy negativist. But I start counting and pointing a finger. 1, 2, 3, 4, so they know I've counted them, moving across the hall. By the time I get to the other side of the room, the hands go up much more readily because they know, hey, they're not the only one. Yeah. Typically, 10% believe they've seen a flying saucer. So if you say an average crowd of 500, that's 50 people.
That's pretty good.
But then I ask, how many of you reported what you saw? And 90% of the hands go down.
Yeah.
And when I talk to people at my table later, my free list of books, and they want me to autograph books and stuff, I ask why they want to tell me about their sighting, and why didn't you report it? They think I was some kind of a nut. Now, I do get a second kind of response when I go through that. For those, if there's still some people who did report, I'll say, how many of you were in the military at the time? If there's still some hands, I'll ask, you want to tell us about it? And I get some great lines. I can't. They told me not to say anything, not in front of 1,300 people at a college in Texas. I get, and some of them will say, well, I'll tell you about it later. I get some great reports that way.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is the real situation is that most people at least are neutral and at best are believers. It's the non-believers who are in the minority.
Yeah.
But the perception is that, if you admit to being interested or having seen one, you're some kind of a nut. Well, these guys are with the cream of the crop, not at the bottom of the barrel.
Exactly.
And, so I'm not, that's one of the reasons people say, you must get a hard time coming on so strong. I said, no, I don't, because most people do accept. And I look upon, I get asked, hey, what do you do when you got a total noisy negativist? I say my approach is I'm not trying to reach those guys.
Yeah.
The extremists at both ends of the opinion spectrum. The people say, don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. They couldn't possibly be real, or they're here to save us. Neither one of those groups wants to listen to facts. I want to deal with facts and data. That's what physicists do. And so I don't gear my lecture toward convincing somebody who won't be convinced. What's the point?
Exactly.
You know, you're tilting at windmills.
Mm-hmm. Now, you sort of touched on this earlier, but I wanted to explore it more, kind of like in the same way that, like I said, you were in the mix at the time. The NICAP versus APRO feud and sort of the differences of opinion on how to go about tackling the UFO phenomenon. Can you talk about some of the players in that situation? Because a lot of people who are coming along nowadays only know about MUFON, but I'm pretty fascinated with the early UFO groups myself. And I've always sort of been fascinated by this kind of feud and dichotomy between the two groups. So maybe just talk a little bit about NICAP versus APRO.
Well, APRO was started by Coral and Jim Lorenzen. And Jim worked at one of the big astronomical facilities. Coral was the noisy one, if you will. And they were more ready to listen to talk about alien beings, abductions, and so forth. Mm-hmm. NICAP, based in Washington, Donald Kehoe had been a Marine Corps pilot. He flew with Lindbergh. He had a lot of contacts inside the government. He was a writer. And Coral was a writer. She wrote books. Kehoe sold better. You know, starting from Washington is a big help. The Lorenzens were in Tucson, Arizona, which back then wasn't a big city. I was just there. It's a big city now, but it wasn't then. And so NICAP sort of took the view that there are these alien spacecraft flying around, the government's covering up what it knows, but there ain't nobody inside. I mean, it was kind of, you know, maybe they're remotely controlled or something. Yeah. And so one of the big feuds was about the whole question of alien beings. Mm-hmm. And NICAP got a little turning around because of the Betty and Barney Hill case. Some of their people talked to Betty and Barney and did some further looking along those lines. But NICAP was set up with these investigative units all over the place, but Kehoe liked to control things. And our group in Pittsburgh was originally a NICAP subcommittee, as they called them. Yeah. And we finally declared our independence because the Home Office wanted to control what we said.
Oh, wow.
And we felt that dealing with the press in Pittsburgh, we were in a better position to make a judgment about that. We had a very good press. Our approach to the press was basically, here are the facts, here's the data, here are the people that are active with us. And I often got calls after doing radio shows and stuff. You know, I heard you on the air. I'd like to help out. I didn't want to mix up with any nuts or anything, but I liked what you said, so how can I help? That kind of thing. Yeah. And so NICAP, officially at least, was not very friendly to our wanting to be independent. But who knows better than us, you know, how to deal with our local press.
Exactly, yeah.
Especially when we had so many professional people involved. I think 3 out of our 4 officers worked for Westinghouse kind of thing. And, you know, and I should add, and maybe people realize this, but, you know, in Indianapolis, if you work for General Motors, you know, how much do you want as a loan for the house you want to buy? Kind of thing. And it was the same in Pittsburgh. Those are gold-plated credentials. And you got to take advantage of that. Yeah. You know, but the town respects the people who work in industry. And so that was important to us. APRO was much more casually established, and they too wanted control, but from home. But, for example, Coral Lorenzen called me about the Betty Hill star map work because Marjorie Fish in Ohio wanted to talk to a scientist to sort of help her out to evaluate her work. She was looking at the map, building 3-dimensional models and so forth. Coral called me. And it happened that because I was traveling so much, I was able to stop by in Ohio where Marjorie lived and look at her work, and I arranged for her to talk to Alan Hynek in Chicago, and I was there when she brought one of her models over and so forth. That wouldn't have happened with NICAP. They were still kind of holding back on all this business with aliens as opposed to alien spacecraft.
Yeah.
So there was certainly, and they would take pot shots at each other in their newsletter from time to time. It's kind of a shame because if they had worked together, it would have all moved forward much better. And NICAP had more luck really in attracting engineers and scientists, partly because of their Washington background and Jim McDonald's pushing. He knew the people at APRO too and helped out, but NICAP was much more behind him.
Yeah.
And so, politics was part of it. Money was part of it. Neither one of them had much money. And what people forget is that, and we had lectures and so forth in Pittsburgh and sold stuff in order to raise money to do investigations.
Yeah.
We had a 24-hour answering service, when that wasn't very common. It cost you money to drive down to West Virginia to check on cases and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there weren't many grants around, let's put it that way.
And one of the interesting stories that it's kind of like a pet question we have here on the show, and I figure maybe you might know some more information about this and could shed some light on it, and that is the now infamous missing APRO documents.
Yeah, and
shed some light on that.
There was a young couple. Hynek had moved down to Arizona when he retired at Northwestern University, and these people convinced him to get involved with them, kind of, and they would get the filing cabinets and all that sort of stuff. And there have been subsequent discussions, and with the Lorenzens had a son who got involved in these discussions someplace along the way. Mm-hmm. And QFOS was set up, the Center for UFO Studies, in Chicago by Hynek, as a matter of fact. And they were supposed to get these files, and they never really did get them. And I wish I knew where they were. And if there's anybody listening who knows where they are, my email address is on my website at www.stantonfriedman.com. But I don't have a good handle on what happened to them. There have been a lot of people chasing them. The NICAP files, a lot of them Keyhole had, and a lot of those did go to QFOS in Chicago. And Dick Hall had some, too, who was assistant director to Keyhole, and who wrote that the UFO evidence, and 30 years later put out a much updated version. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's one of the missing APRO documents is a mysterious aspect to the whole thing. The other big question we sort of ponder here on the show a lot, you kind of touched on it earlier, so maybe you can talk a little bit more about this, is the lack of young people gravitating towards ufology today. How are we going to get these people interested, and why do you think young people aren't gravitating towards ufology?
Well, one of the big things that's changed in the last 30, 40 years is how the opportunities people have, the ways in which they can spend their time and their money.
Yeah.
I touched on that briefly by saying, we used to have these huge crowds because there was nothing for them to do.
Yeah.
Well, the young generation has grown up in the computer age, and they're onto the internet, and unfortunately they believe almost everything they read on there. And there isn't a loud noise. There isn't a gathering in. Now, MUFON may be changing that to some extent because there's a new director coming in. He's just come in, as a matter of fact, Jim Carrion. Mm-hmm. He's a lot younger. He's full of ideas and enthusiasm, and maybe we can attract more of the young people, give special rates to attend the national symposium that is held every year, get the local groups to make more of an effort to go to the local colleges.
Yeah.
We need a plan of action, in other words, and there are exceptions. I mean, look at John Greenwald. I think John may be all of 26 now, but he's certainly been at this at least 10 years. Mm-hmm. He's got the website, The Black Vault. And if people want to see a lot of UFO documents, boy, they can sure find them there from everybody and his brother. And I would like to see, how should I put this? If we could get the media, the young people in the media, to recognize that they've been hornswoggled over the years, that they've been taken in by the noisy negativists, the debunkers. I mean, unfortunately, you might say some of the debunkers are gone too, so their voices aren't being heard as loudly. But I think it's a difficult problem. I think that what we need to do is make them aware that we want them to help. We need recruiting. That's all.
Yeah.
But it isn't as easy to recruit now because you're competing. It's like I tell colleges about my lecture. I say, you're not competing with another UFO lecture. There won't be one that night. But you're competing with the Internet, the movies, the television stations, the videos. So you have to make a lot more noise now to get interest, response. Somebody once wrote you got to find out about something 6 times before you decide you're going to go to it. You know, something different. And so we need to reach out much more than we ever had to before. In Pittsburgh, we could get press attention because they knew us. When there was a big fuss about a sighting, we were the first to come up and say, no, that wasn't a flying saucer. It was a re-entry of a spacecraft, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's on 3. But now there are too many things taking people's attention. And so we need parents to start pushing their kids in this direction, if you will. Those of us who have kids, to let them know there's something exciting and interesting. And another part of the problem is we tend to be a self-censoring group because of this fear of ridicule.
Yeah.
There are many people who don't want to make waves. And I say, make all the waves you can. It's okay. I've never had a tomato or an egg thrown at me, you know. It's all right. And speak out and express yourself, as somebody once said. And we need more of that, I'm afraid. You know, it's easy for me to say because I'm a Leo and I'm naturally a noisy guy. But I'm trying to encourage other people to do the same thing. It's surprising. If you reach out to your fellow workers, let's say, or friends, you'd be amazed how many of them are interested, but have never said anything. I've had that happen. People come to my lectures. Oh, hey, Joe, I didn't know you were interested. Oh, I've been interested for years. Didn't know you were interested. That's what happens. So, you know, let me give my website again, www.stantonfriedman.com, and I'll offer my special radio package, my radio special. It's on the website under specials, but both my books, Crash at Corona, The Definitive Study of the Roswell Incident, and Top Secret Magic, MAJIC, and my CD-ROM, UFOs, The Real Story. That's $45 worth of stuff for only $35, and that includes priority mail shipping. They can get it through PayPal on the website or send me a check at Post Office Box 958, Houlton, Houlton, Maine, ME, 04730-0958. And if you know anything about pilots trying to shoot down UFOs, or pilots who were shot down by UFOs, or about Roswell, maybe a grandchild who says he's got a piece of wreckage, contact me. I want to hear.
There you go. Let me ask you one quick follow-up on the pilot request, because I've heard you making this request for the last couple of years. What's the turnout been so far on this request for information on pilots missing?
Gotten several interesting responses. The most interesting was somebody who read my column in the MUFON Journal, Shoot Them Down, or Zapped Airplanes, I guess was the title of it. And he had a friend who was flying for the military in Europe in the early 50s, a college classmate of his. When he came back, he asked him, and all he would say was, we lost 20 planes to UFOs. So I managed to track down the guy's family. They're looking through records because I want to know what outfit he was in. He's deceased. But that was one. I had another guy who said that in Washington, after the big 52 wave of sightings, this is where we found out that orders were given to pilots to shoot them down if they don't land when instructed to do so. And there'll be a new book out this year by Frank Ficino, for which I wrote the forward and epilogue about that. But a guy called me who served in Washington in the military at that time. He said they weren't only being scrambled in July, Stan. For the next year, we were scrambling jets. And he had a case to tell me of 2 pilots went up, 1 came back. And all the person would say was, it went straight up. Straight up.
Wow.
So I'm looking for that sort of stuff, and, we're racing the Undertaker, but every little bit helps.
Yeah, yeah. What spawned your interest in the pilot aspect in general? Because this is something new for you.
Well, I've always been interested in pilots, but it was when Frank Ficino's book, The Braxton County Monster, cover-up of the Flatwoods Monster revealed, it drew some strong attacks from people who said, there weren't any dogfights between UFOs and our airplanes. So I got a couple people, Dr. David Rudiak and Barry Greenwell, outstanding researchers, to look through their files. They got enough clippings to choke a horse with, several horses. And we dug out the rest of these, and it was astonishing. We went back to the old books that I'd read back in the 60s, and found more and more of these accounts. And so we collected a huge amount of stuff. And that's what led to Frank's new book, Shoot Them Down. And it's scary sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And for those who think, how could they keep secret the fact that a plane was destroyed by a UFO, I recommend the book By Any Means Necessary by William Burroughs, which talks about the deaths of 166 crewmen of reconnaissance planes that were shot down by the Soviets as we probed Russia, China, and North Korea back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. No word in public. Lies to the families until 2001. That's when they were told what had happened to their, sons, brothers, fathers, whatever. Yes, they can keep these things secret. That's why I want to hear from more pilots.
Awesome. Well, Stan, thank you very much for coming on the show. It was great having you back. Hopefully we can do this again next year and around the holidays.
Sure.
and keep up the tradition going here. And thank you very much for all your support for the show and everything. This is the third time we've had you on, and I could talk to you every holiday season till the end of time, I think, trying to go over all this great information and your vast history in the field of ufology. It's been a real education for me. And thanks again for being on the show.
My pleasure.
There you have it, folks. Thus concludes the 2006 Binnall of America Audio Christmas special. Huge thanks to Stanton Friedman for coming back on the show and helping to make this a holiday tradition. You can find out more information on Stanton Friedman at his website, www.stantonfriedman.com, STANTONFRIEDMAN.com. Check it out. Lots of great information on there. Moving right along now, it's time for Binnall of America Audio listener feedback, and this week's letter comes from Nick in Portland, Oregon. Here's what he has to say. Tim, thanks for doing the interviews with the speakers from the UFO Crash Retrieval Conference. I really wanted to attend myself, but was unable to make it happen. Your interviews gave me a little taste of being there. And, in general, thanks for doing your show. B of A Audio is one of the best UFO-related podcasts out there. Keep up the great work. Your time and effort is much appreciated. Thanks, Nick in Portland, Oregon. Well, Nick, thank you very much for writing in. I appreciate the feedback, and I am truly humbled by your generous praise of the show. I'm very happy that you enjoyed the UFO CRC special episode. I was a little worried about how that edition of BOA Audio would go over with our listening audience, but it sounds like people really enjoyed the different format and the plethora of guests we managed to feature. Your impressions of the special were really the goal of our overall coverage of the conference. We really wanted to give a taste of the UFO CRC. We have a lot of great listeners that are pretty far away from Las Vegas and just couldn't make the trip out there. So what I wanted to do really was try and share the experience with all of you, and it sounds like we managed to accomplish that. As far as B of A Audio being one of the best UFO-related podcasts, all I can say really to that is thank you so much for your kind words. Don't you worry, Nick. I'm going to keep on doing my work. You just keep on listening, and the best is yet to come, I assure you. Thanks again for writing, and have a very happy holidays. If you would like to be a part of Binnall of America Audio listener feedback, simply click the contact button in the top right-hand corner of the BinnallofAmerica.com website, or write to boaaudio@hotmail.com. Either of those methods will put your correspondence on the road to being featured on Binnall of America Audio listener feedback. Wrapping up the show now, I want to give big thanks and happy holiday wishes to Leslie, Chiron, R. Lee, Joe V., and Ralph Molesworth of BinnallofAmerica.com for your tireless help and support with the website and the audio series. Without these fine folks, BinnallofAmerica.com and Binnall of America Audio would be a fraction of what it is today. Thank you so much for your help, guys. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays. BinnallofAmerica.com. Make it a part of your everyday search for esoteric news and opinion. In addition to the gang at BinnallofAmerica.com, I want to thank some of the websites that have been instrumental in getting the word out on Binnall of America Audio, starting with Anomalous.com, DailyGrail.com, About.com's Paranormal Phenomena section, UFOReview.net, Wintersteel.com, RedIceCreations.com, RemoteCentral.blogspot.com, and PostAtomic.com. Those great sites have brought just so many people to the Binnall of America audio program. Chances are you heard of us through one of those sites. So thank you very much to all of them. I consider them friends of Binnall of America Audio. Happy holidays to all of them as well. If you're a longtime Binnall of America Audio listener, an appreciative newcomer, or you're just filled to the brim with holiday spirit and you want to help support the audio series, click the PayPal button at BinnallofAmerica.com. Make a donation. Every little bit helps. The cost of this audio program comes out of my pocket with help from generous Binnall of America Audio listeners. If you want to join that crew of generous listeners, simply click the PayPal button at BinnallofAmerica.com and make a donation. Next week on Binnall of America Audio, it is going to be a groundbreaking interview with James Carrion, the new International Director of MUFON. This last July, John Schuessler stepped aside as Director of MUFON, turned the reins of the organization over to James Carrion. James stepped into the position in the beginning of December, a scant 3 weeks ago. And I sat down to talk with him about the state of MUFON today. Where does MUFON stand on some of the big issues in ufology? Where does he see MUFON going under his leadership? Exciting new initiatives that we can expect to see coming from MUFON in the next year. James answers the tough questions that many critics have about MUFON. And, of course, tons and tons more. We're going to cover a ton of ground here with soon-to-be one of the most influential people in all of ufology, James Carrion, the new International Director of MUFON. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. This is Tim Binnall, wishing you happy holidays and a very Merry Christmas, and signing off.